I will. I am Nehemiah, and these are my words. My brother Hanani and I are sons of Hakaliah. Now, if you think I mispronounced those names, may I remind you, I am Nehemiah, governor of Judah. I was there. My brother and I were born and reared in Persia. Our people are Jews who have been scattered all over the world since the Persians conquered Babylon in the year 539. Our holy city, Jerusalem, was destroyed by the Babylonians in 586. It is now the year 430, and finally, after 175 years, things are starting to turn around. But it was hard. In 445, my brother and other Jews had been to Judah, where Jerusalem is. Travel between Judah and Persia became easier after the fall of Babylon. The Persians allowed it. Artaxerxes had been the king of Persia for 20 years, and I was his cupbearer. That was a really important position since I had the responsibility for the safety of the king. And having access to him, then I became the king's trusted companion. Hanani told me that the remnant of the Jews who had survived the exile and were in Judea were in great trouble and shame. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, he said. Its gates are destroyed by fire. And that broke my heart. As soon as I heard that, I sat down and wept and mourned for days. All I could think to do was talk to God. And so I prayed, God, listen and look. I know we have sinned against you, but you promised through Moses that if we would return to you and keep your commandments and do them, then you would gather us from the uttermost parts of heaven and bring us back to the place where your name dwells. Now, I'm about to go in to see the king, and I'm going to ask him for permission to go to Judah and see what I can do. Please make me your servant and grant me mercy in the sight of the king. Lo and behold, when I approached Artaxerxes about it, he simply asked how long I would be gone. When I gave him a time, he said, okay. Success! I prayed that God would give me success, and he did. It was going so well, I made 2 more requests of the king. I needed letters addressed to the governors of the provinces in the region beyond the Euphrates River that would allow me to pass through their territories. I also asked for a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest in Judah, which would grant me the timber necessary for the construction I thought was going to be needed. The gates had been burned, and they had to be rebuilt. The king agreed to give me what I requested, but it was really the good hand of God that was on me. There is power in prayer. I have seen it. So I set out for Judah with the authority of the king. Being almost 1,000 miles away, it took me several months to get there. And even though I had officers of the army and horsemen with me, I was immediately opposed. A man named Sanballat, supposedly the governor of Samaria, and Tobiah, who was some kind of a government official in the Persian province of Ammon, knowing I was there for the welfare of the people, they didn't like it. Evidently, they were thinking that any change in the status quo would diminish their power somehow. I was patient. I waited 3 days before surveying the damage to the city walls, and I took my horse and a few men with me, and we examined the damage in the night. And since I had not told anyone about what I was doing, those officials that I mentioned didn't know where I had gone and what I was doing, we found Jerusalem in ruins, and the gates burned. The walls had to be rebuilt. Many Jews had returned years before, but they hadn't done much. They did finally complete the temple some 70 years before I went there, but evidently nothing had been done to the walls, even though that protection was so greatly needed. The people needed to be encouraged. So I called an assembly and said to the people, "Come, let us build the wall of Jerusalem, that we may no longer suffer derision, and God will be with us." And they were strengthened, and they agreed, and they said, "Let us rise up and build." Well, not everybody. Sanballat and Tobiah went out and got the leader of an Arabian tribe to join them in their opposition. They jeered and mocked us and falsely accused us of rebelling against the king. So I had a Samaritan, a Jew, and an Arabian against me even before I got the work underway. But I knew that the God of heaven would make us prosper. The work was organized well, and for the most part, everyone did his job. There was no class distinction. We had a common resolve toward a common goal. Priests stood with goldsmiths, perfumers, Levites, rulers, temple servants, and merchants. And we had some female laborers too. Shallum, ruler of a district of half the district of Jerusalem, and his daughters repaired that section of the wall next to the Tower of the Ovens. Shallum taught his children to take an interest in the work of the Lord and set before them the right kind of an example, a good example. One, God created us all, and so we all worked for Him. In those workers, however, I found some shirkers and some jerkers. The Tekoites repaired a part of the wall, but their nobles would not stoop to serve the king. Workers yield to do God's will, but shirkers do so only slightly. Workers are involved in the task, but shirkers are only slightly involved. And the jerks were still around, afraid of losing control, afraid of losing attention, afraid of losing influence, and afraid of losing position. When Sanballat heard how the work was going, he became even more angry. He jeered at the workers and he said stupid things like, "Do you think you can revive these heaps of rubbish and burned stones and build a wall in a day?" The other jerk, Tobiah, also made fun of us. He said, "If a fox goes up against it, he will break down their stone wall." Nobody should ever say about the Lord's work, "It will not last. It is too weak. It is too little. It will not work." No one should ever say such things about the Lord's work. So I prayed about it. God, would you just listen to them? Make them eat their words. Turn their taunts back on them. Don't cover their guilt. Make them suffer. Surely they have made you angry. Now I know that sounds contrary to the Spirit of God, but that's the way I felt. And all the Jews felt that way about those jerks. You see, I had a vision. And I pitched it to the people, and the people bought into it. The jobs were assigned, and the work began because we were committed. We very quickly got the wall halfway done because the people were willing to work. But that success just angered the enemies even more. This time, the opposition was not confined to Sanballat and Tobiah, but extended to the Arabs, Ammonites, and Ashdodites. The Arab opposers were led by Geshem. So, Ammon was on our east, Samaria was on the north, and Ashdod was on our western border. And so, all the people surrounding us plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and cause confusion in it. Now, I don't know if the threat was real or just a bluff, but it seemed to me to be mostly just negative talk. The Jews who lived near the persecutors were coming to us over and over and over again, saying to the workers, "You must return to us." They were trying to get them away from the work. So I armed the people. I armed them with swords, spears, and bows. You see, sometimes prayer's not enough. God expects us to act and to do what we can to defend His work. So I armed the people. And after I armed the people, then I assured the people. I said, "Don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord." So I armed them, I assured them, and then I aroused them, saying, "Fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, your homes." I know you've heard the saying, eternal vigilance is the price of freedom. But I wouldn't ask the people to do something that I wouldn't do myself. So neither I, nor my brothers, nor my servants, nor the men of the guard who followed me, none of us took off our clothes. Each kept his weapon at his right hand. There were not only troubles from the outside. There were those troubles coming at us from the outside, but there were also troubles within, troubles on the inside. And I think the problem started even before I arrived in Jerusalem. The people were hungry. The rich were taking advantage of the poor by lending them money at high interest rates. And they were taking the borrowers' property and even their children when they couldn't repay their loans. I was so angry when I heard about that, I had to have a little talk with myself. And then I confronted those who were sinning against their brothers and brought charges against them in a public assembly. I demanded that they make things right. I said, "Return to them this very day their fields, their vineyards, their olive orchards, and their houses, and the percentage of money, grain, wine, and oil that you have been exacting from them." And to their credit, those in the wrong were convicted in their hearts, and they promised to fix the problem. "We will do as you say," they swore. And I practiced what I preached. Even though I was the governor of the land of Judah for 12 years. For 12 years, I did not eat the food allowance of the governor. I did not require the traditional payments for governors. I would not add to the financial burden of the people, even though I could have. And there's a good reason for this. I did not do so because of the fear of God. And I asked God to remember that. Now I realize that I spoke boldly to God when I said, "Now God, here's what remember me, remember what I do." I realize that's speaking very boldly to God, but there is freedom of access to the throne of grace for the true believer. And when we know that God is pleased with us because we do His will, we're encouraged by that knowledge. And so it was comforting to me to pour out my heart according to truth to the God who had blessed me so much. The work on the wall continued, and still all was going well. It was going so well, in fact, that the ones who were trying to stop it changed their ways. Having failed in their efforts to frighten us with physical threats, the opposers tried to end the reconstruction of the wall by new tactics. And these new attacks involved me particularly. I suppose that's the way it is when the leader is doing what he is supposed to be doing. Well, the first attempt at me, the first attack, was that of isolation. We can just never let down our guard. As soon as we do, we are vulnerable. Sanballat and Geshem sent me a letter saying, "Come and let us meet together at Hakkephirim, or one of the villages on the plain of Ono." You see, they wanted me to leave the safety of Jerusalem and the protection of my relationships there. So they wanted me on the plain of Ono. And I said, "Oh, no, I am not leaving this good work and come down on your level. If there's going to be any peace at all, it will be a result of your accepting my terms." I knew they wanted to do me harm, and that's why they wanted to get me alone. They sent me that same letter 4 times. 4 times! They sent me that same letter. They wanted me isolated. My relationships frustrated them. But they didn't stop with the messages. They sent that one 4 times, and then they sent a 5th one. And the 5th message included an insinuation. Now, a sealed letter would have been intended for my eyes only, but this was an open letter. And that let me know that these accusations are going public. The letter said, "People are saying that you and the Jews intend to rebel, and that is why you're building the wall. And according to these reports, you wish to be their king." Rumors are destructive, and that one was about me. "You want to be king," they said. They were trying to get me to doubt my motives. Why was I really doing this? But that didn't work. The only response I could give them was, "No such things as you say have been done. You're making all that up." The enemies they wanted to weaken my resolve. And so I prayed for renewed resolve. "Oh God, strengthen my hands." But it just wouldn't stop. The evil opposition would not stop. After the isolation, then the insinuation, the enemy used a trusted friend of mine for intimidation. When I was visiting with Shemaiah, he suggested that I go into the temple for safety. He said, "They're coming to kill you tonight." But I couldn't do that. The law under which I live before God says that no one but the priest may enter the temple. For me to enter the temple was punishable by death. I know the Bible well enough to recognize when I'm being lied to. Now, even as governor, with the important work I was doing, I could not put myself above God's law. Not even to save my own skin could I hide in the temple. If I can be intimidated, then I can't be effective. Besides, I knew Shemaiah was hired by Tobiah and Sanballat to make me afraid and to give me a bad name. So I prayed, "God, remember Tobiah and Sanballat for what they did, and all the prophets who wanted to make me afraid. What a great day it was. What a great day it was. And I remember it so well. It was on the 25th day of the month, Elul, in the year 444. Now that's your September. The wall was finished after having taken only 52 days to rebuild it. I would not be deterred from completing that task. And because the people had a mind to work, we got it done. And what a great influence that had. All the nations around us came to understand this is the work of God. The next thing I had to do was provide for the city's security. As the governor of Judah, I made sure that Jerusalem was constantly guarded. And then I determined to have the city populated with faithful Jews. So I took a census of the people and organized the resettlement of the land. The leaders of the people and 1/10 of the people lived in the city of Jerusalem. Those Jerusalem people were chosen by lot. The rest of the people lived in the other towns of Judah and blessed the ones who offered willingly to live in the city of Jerusalem. Together with Ezra, the priest and scribe, the people read the book of the law of Moses and followed that great assembly with even further study of the words of the law. And in that study, we found that God had commanded through Moses that the people of Israel should dwell in booths during the feast of the 7th month. Now, we had not been doing that. Not even since Joshua and the leaders who were with him had we been doing that. And so we made booths on the roofs and in the courtyards of the houses and kept the feast 7 days, reading the book of the law of God every day. And on the 8th day, there was a solemn assembly. We remembered and commemorated how God cared for our ancestors in the wilderness after their deliverance from Egyptian bondage, as God commanded. It is important that we read, know, and follow God's Word in worship and service and remember what God has done. When the king asked, "How long will you be gone?" I said 12 years. So after 12 years as governor of Judah, I returned to the service of Artaxerxes. That was in the year 433 that I returned. It was in the 36th year of the reign of Artaxerxes as king of Babylon or Persia or the Achaemenid Empire, whatever you want to call it. And after about 5 years back in Babylon, where the king was at that time, I asked the king for leave to return to Jerusalem, and he allowed me to return for a second term as governor. A lot of things happened in Judah while I was away, and some of them were not good. When I went to Jerusalem the first time, I found broken walls. But when I went the second time, I found a broken community. Before I left Judah, back in 433, the people had made 4 sacred vows. Now, I wrote about this. You might have it in a book divided into chapters and verses. And if you do, if you have a book like that, you probably find those vows in what you might have as chapter 10. You see, the first one was, they said, they vowed to follow God's laws. They made an oath to walk in God's law that was given by Moses, the servant of God, and to observe and do all the commandments of the Lord, our Lord, and His rules and His statutes. That was the first vow they made. And then secondly, they vowed not to intermarry with the idol-worshiping nations around them. Also, they vowed or promised to keep the holy day the holy day. And if the peoples of the land bring in goods or any grain on the Sabbath day to sell, we will not buy from them on the Sabbath or on a holy day, they said. And the fourth vow, according to what I put there in the book, they vowed to give, to support the priests and the Levites. But on my return back to Judah, I found out that these people who made those vows had broken all four of them, every one of them. The people understood from their study of the book of Moses that they should separate themselves from foreigners, especially Ammonites and Moabites. See, God had said as much because these people, the Ammonites and the Moabites, had not met the people of Israel with bread and water when they were in need during the wandering. Instead of wanting to be hospitable to the children of God, they sought to curse them and even hired a prophet named Balaam to do just that. And still, in spite of all of that, still, Eliashib, the high priest, of all people, Eliashib prepared a large chamber in the temple complex for Tobiah the Ammonite. Yeah, the very Tobiah, my enemy. Tobiah had no right to be there. Eliashib should not have made space available for Tobiah's layovers. And more than that, in addition to that, he made room for him by removing from the chamber the few supplies that were there, which were essential for the support of the temple services and the priests and the Levites who worked there. If I had been there, that would never have happened. Oh, that made me so mad. I threw all of Tobiah's junk out of the chamber and I had it cleansed. I brought back into it all of the vessels of the house of God. I brought back into it the grain offering and the frankincense. Now, you may think my behavior is outrageous. I know one person did. He said about me, quote, "Nehemiah is not a leader who convinces by tact and political maneuvering. His approach is direct, physical, and threatening. There is little here to admire," he wrote. End of quote. Well, I want to remind you of some things. I had already tried persuasion, public shame, my own example, the reading of the law of God, and a renewal of the covenant with God to turn the people away from sin. I didn't use force until the people showed the extreme hardness of their hearts. Extreme problems call for extreme solutions. Besides, I was the governor of Judah, a secular governor appointed by a Persian king to enforce the law of the land, and the law of the land in Judah was the law of Moses, and I had every right to enforce that law. I acted rightly. But I'm not saying that you should act the way I did. See, you're privileged to be a part of a spiritual kingdom, not of this world. You serve the Prince of Peace. And you live in a system of grace and truth. Now, disobedient Christians are punished by a withdrawal of fellowship. And the New Testament doesn't give Christians the right to punish non-Christians, no matter what their offenses might be. So it's different for you. And I'm not suggesting that you should act today like I did then. But that's not all I had to deal with on my return. Oh, leadership is tough. It is hard. Tobiah's furniture in the temple chambers was not the only junk I had to get rid of. I found that the people also had junky finances, a junky calendar, and junky associations. The people had stopped giving. And that's why the storehouses had enough room for Tobiah's furniture. And when the support failed, when the people stopped giving, the Lord's work fell by the wayside. The Levites and the singers who did the work had fled each to his field. So I confronted the officials and said, "Why is the house of God forsaken?" And when finally Judah did bring the tithe of grain, wine, and oil for the storehouses, I put reliable people in charge. I love the house of God, don't you? I love the house of God. So I prayed, "Remember me, O my God, concerning this, and do not wipe out my good deeds that I have done for the house of my God and for His service." So people had junky finances when they quit giving. The people also had a junky calendar. What I mean is, they had come to observing the Sabbath day much the same as they did any other day of the week. It was not a red letter day on their calendar. Even on Saturday, they were treading wine presses and bringing in all kinds of loads on donkeys. And foreigners were bringing into Jerusalem all kinds of goods and selling them to the people of Judah on the Sabbath. I spoke to the people in charge, the nobles, and said, "What is this evil thing that you're doing? Profaning the Sabbath day." And so as soon as it got dark on Friday, I commanded that the doors be shut until the Sabbath day was completely over. Even then, even after I started doing that, some merchants and sellers set up camp outside the gates, outside the city once or twice. And I told them, "Why do you lodge outside the wall? If you do so again, I'll lay hands on you." Then I had to pray again. "Remember this also in my favor, O God, and spare me according to the greatness of your steadfast love." But what was even worse than all of that, the people had junky associations. The Jews had married women of Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab. Their intermarriage was so wrong, the language of Judah was lost. Half of their children spoke the language of Ashdod, and they could not speak the language of Judah, but only the language of each people. When God's children marry unbelievers, the children often pay the price. So another rebuke was needed. I confronted them and cursed them and beat some of them and pulled out their hair. And I made them take an oath in the name of God, saying, "You shall not give your daughters and your sons, or take their daughters for your sons or for yourselves." Even the son of the high priest Eliashib had married a daughter of my enemy Sanballat the Horonite. this was yet another time that I was disappointed with that family. Even priests of God will let you down sometimes. Well, he might have been a son of the high priest, but I chased him away from me. And I prayed to God, remember them, oh my God, because they have desecrated the priesthood and the covenant of the priesthood and the Levites. I was just trying to solve the problems that took people away from God and honored God at the same time. I recognized the problems for what they really were and honestly said to the people, thinking communication was important, I said to the people, this is a problem, it is wrong, and we have to do something. I looked for permanent solutions and would not accept excuses. I tried to deal with all of the issues decisively, but I sought God's help in every situation. I hope you will learn from my successes and failures. The work gets done when the people have a mind to work. But working for God demands that we be sober and vigilant in view of the enemy. I learned, and hope that you will also learn, that there will always be some who wish to discourage the work by saying, it will not be done. But there will always be those who do the work saying, it will be done. And you must keep this resolve. We will not neglect the house of God. Now for you, the house of God is the church of the living God. What a wonderful institution that is. So far greater than Israel. Your covenant is so far, so much better than mine was. What a privilege you have to be a part of a spiritual kingdom and not a physical one like mine. So keep that resolve to work for the family of God, the house of God. Do not neglect it. Learn that nothing is more important than God's kingdom. And also, resolve to keep yourself pure. It's a terribly sad day when our children speak the language of Ashdod and cannot speak the spiritual language in which they should be trained. When we act unfaithfully on earth, we sin against the God of heaven. So I ask you, should we listen to ungodly people and do great evil and act treacherously against our God? Throughout my work as governor of Judah, I got a lot of bad news. But we got through it. Some of those things were very emotional for me. I admit that when I heard from my brother about the sad state of affairs in Jerusalem, I wept for days. My reaction to that bad news and other bad news that came later was remembering, praying, confessing, and believing. That's how I reacted to bad news. Remembered, prayed, confessed, and believed. Remember how awesome God is. The Lord God of heaven is the great and awesome God. That's what I call Him. That's what Nehemiah call Him. When times are good and when times are bad, take time to praise God. Remember God. And then remember who you are. I never forgot. I may have been made by the king of Persia. 127 provinces. I may have been made by him the very governor of Judah, but I never forgot that I was a servant of God. We must make sure that God is first and we are simply serving Him. Maybe that will keep us leaders from being arrogant and proud. But it may take some tragedy or some bad news to remind us of that. So remember, and pray a lot. Boy, I sure did. Read that book I wrote. Read all those prayers I prayed. And there were more. There were more than those I recorded in that book. I prayed a lot. God loves you, and He wants to hear from you. So live a life of prayer like I did. But you have to be honest. You have to be honest with God. First, you have to be honest with yourself. My entire nation had sinned against God, and I had to include myself in that and confess those sins. Being honest first with myself, a sinner, a part of a sinful nation, before a righteous, perfect, holy God. It takes a big man to admit that he's wrong. So remember, pray, confess, and believe. Believe that God will always keep His promises. When I prayed, I always had the promises of God in my mind. I once prayed to God, remember the word that you commanded your servant Moses, saying, if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the peoples. But if you return, I will gather them and bring them to the place that I have chosen. God did just that. He did that. You may always ask for God's help. I did. When I went in to see King Artaxerxes, and God answered my prayers, and with His help, we rebuilt Jerusalem. I want to thank you for listening to my story. The words of Nehemiah. You know, I think it's just great that the Salem Church of Christ has an adult Bible class and vacation Bible school every year. There are, I've preached a lot of gospel meetings with far less people than is in this room, in this class tonight. And you're to be commended for bringing your children, your grandchildren to be a part of our vacation Bible school and learn about the greatest heroes, who should be our heroes, the heroes of our lives, after whom we model our character. You're to be commended for bringing them, but you're also to be commended for being a part of this class and listening so carefully. And I didn't see anybody go to sleep, not even Colton. He didn't even go to sleep. And I appreciate that very much. Well, before we're dismissed, and I'm going to give you some time tonight, a lot of time. You might want to sing a song or two, Perry. You know any more songs? Are those the only two you knew? Okay. Andrew's here. Yeah, Andrew's here. This announcement involves your sweet tooth. We've been told that there are refreshments for you adults on the table in the hallway to the right of the foyer. As you go out into the foyer, the hallway to the right, there's a table there with goodies on there for you, just for you folks. So when we're dismissed here after a couple of songs, you may go treat yourself. And was that the only announcement that we need to make? Tim?
Announce the fish fry and the pig.
Okay, since we've got time for that, we could do that. We Saturday evening, starting at 5:30, is our annual men's fish fry. Jane, men's fish fry. Jane, starting at 5:30. Boy, I'm in big trouble now. You know, starting at 5:30, and we're requesting that you men bring some things, and if you can do that. There's a sign-up sheet that's in the outer office. Is it still there? On the outer office on the calendar. As you go into the door on the outer office, it's on the left, right over the printer right over the copy machine. There's a list there. And you can volunteer to bring drinks or whatever, cook or whatever. And then Sunday is our annual Pig on the Creek, which is not Pig on the Creek. It's Pig on the lawn, Pig in the yard. But we're going to have it over here around the activity building here at this location. And what we do is we'll meet, of course, for our Bible classes at 9 o'clock Sunday morning. We'll have worship at 10 o'clock, just like always, with a real brief little sermon like we always have. And then we'll be dismissed, and we'll have this big meal and this great time of fellowship and food and this wonderful meal. Then after we enjoy that and picking on each other for a little while, then we have our afternoon service at 1 o'clock. Am I right? Whenever I make a mistake, huh?
Around that.
Around 1 o'clock. We'll have our afternoon service around 1 o'clock. Okay.
Bring a chair.
Bring a lawn chair because it's on the lawn. And so bring a lawn chair. We won't have any fresh flowing water to cool your feet in this year, but we'll still have a good time. We'll still enjoy it. And that's this coming Sunday. Men's fish fry Saturday night, and then that's on Sunday. And then is there an elders deacons meeting? Okay, that's not Sunday. Okay. Well, I didn't know when to. We've still got a few minutes. I didn't know when to make this announcement, but since we got time, I'm going to make it now. I wanted to do this over a year and a half ago, because we finally got a house up here big enough to have room to have folks in and do this, and so just got moved in, and then I started planning to do this, and the pandemic hit, and so I was told, you can't have company. Your own family can't even come to see you. You can't even have your grandkids. You can't have company. So that killed me for over a year. So I think we're past that now, right? We're beyond that. So we're going to have at my house, we'll meet at 1 o'clock Sunday afternoon. So at my house, about 5:30 or 6, I'm inviting everybody who plays a guitar or who is learning to play a guitar to come to my house, and we're going to have a guitar jam. Now, no spectators, because we're not ready for that. Now, if we find out if we have any talent, picking and grinning and singing, then we might have a Zip City Opera soon. If we find out, if we don't have any talent, we're never going to do that. But if we find out that we got a little talent, we might have a Zip City Opera later on, and everybody's invited to that. And you buy your tickets and pay at the door. No, I'm just kidding. No, not that. But anyway, so, question?
What if you just got to get
Yeah, if you're learning. So you bring your guitar to my house and you bring a song you're working on. Now I know some of the kids play and they're not in here, so we'll go tell them. Y'all tell them, okay? It's at my house, Sunday night, 5:30, 6, whatever. I'll have snacks and whatever. And you bring your guitar, Ethan, bring your guitar and bring your song that you've been working on, and you got to play it and sing it for us, And then we'll see if we got any talent, and maybe we'll put together a Zip City Opera later on. So, okay? You learned another song while I was doing all that. All right, thank you.
You'll sit down.
Okay.
Hey, Nehemiah, I got one question. How'd you know those dates of everything that happened? Since
I was there. I remember. You remember I told you?
That's kind of the BC dates.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm an old guy.
He's a smart guy. Let's say number 877.